In 25 BCE, the most powerful empire on earth decided to collect a tax. Rome. The empire that crushed Carthage, conquered Greece, destroyed kingdoms across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Its soldiers were feared from Britain to Persia. And now, Rome turned its eyes south, toward a small African kingdom. The queen of that kingdom had only one answer. No. What followed was not a massacre. Not another story of Rome steamrolling its enemies. And not another story of Africa bowing to foreign power. What followed became one of the most extraordinary wars of the ancient world. A one-eyed African queen stood against Rome. And she did not lose. Welcome back to Echoes of the Forgotten. Today, we uncover the story of Amanirenas, warrior queen of Kush, defender of Nubia, one of the fiercest rulers the ancient world ever produced. If you watched our episode on the Kingdom of Kush, then you already know the rise of this powerful civilization. But today, we focus on one woman, one war, and one outcome Rome never expected. This is not the kind of history most people are taught. But once you hear it, you will never forget it. To understand Amanirenas, you first have to understand the world she came from. She ruled the Kingdom of Kush, also known as the Meroitic Kingdom, centered around the great city of Meroe in what is now modern-day Sudan. And unlike many kingdoms of the ancient world, women in Kush held real power. The title Kandake, often translated as Queen Mother or Ruling Queen, was not ceremonial. Kandakes commanded armies, negotiated treaties, declared war. They ruled. Amanirenas rose to power around 40 BCE, likely alongside her husband, King Tereticas. But early in the conflict with Rome, Tereticas died. And Amanirenas would face the greatest empire on earth, alone. There is another detail that makes her story even more remarkable. Amanirenas was blind in one eye. The Greek historian Strabo described her as fierce, fearless, and physically imposing. He specifically mentioned the loss of her eye. How she lost it, nobody knows for certain. Battle, disease, injury. History never tells us. But what history does tell us, is this. She led armies personally. Not from a distant palace. Not behind walls. From the battlefield itself. Imagine that image for a moment. A one-eyed queen, riding into war against Rome. By 30 BCE. Everything in northeastern Africa had changed. Egypt had fallen to Rome. After the defeat of Mark Antony and Cleopatra VII Philopator, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, absorbed Egypt into the Roman Empire. Rome now stood directly on Kush's northern border. And Rome always wanted more. Roman troops occupied border cities near the Nile. Taxes were imposed on Kushite territories near the frontier. And the message from Rome was clear. Submit. Pay. Obey. But Kush was not weak. For centuries, the Kushites had fought Egyptians, Assyrians, and rival kingdoms. They understood war. And Amanirenas had no intention of bowing to a foreign empire. So while Rome expected compliance, the queen prepared for battle. Around 25 BCE. While the Roman governor Gaius Petronius was occupied elsewhere, Amanirenas made her move. She gathered an army reportedly numbering 30,000 warriors. And launched a surprise invasion into Roman-controlled Egypt. The attack was fast. Brutal. Precise. Kushite forces stormed the cities of Aswan, Philai, and Elephantine. Roman soldiers were overwhelmed. Some were killed. Others were captured and marched south into Kush as prisoners. But the most shocking moment came after the victory. Among the spoils of war were statues of Emperor Augustus himself. Amanirenas ordered one of the bronze heads removed. Then she carried it back to Meroe. And buried it beneath the steps of a temple. So that every person entering that sacred place would walk over the face of Rome's emperor. It was more than revenge. It was a statement. A declaration that Kush would never kneel. And remarkably, archaeologists actually found that bronze head centuries later. Today, it sits in the British Museum. A silent reminder that one African queen humiliated the Roman Empire. Rome could not ignore the attack. The killing of Roman soldiers. The invasion of Roman territory. The desecration of Augustus' image. This meant war. The Roman governor Petronius marched south with a full military force. The legions retook lost territory quickly. Then they pushed deeper into Kush. Eventually, the Romans captured Napata, one of Kush's sacred cities. It was burned. Looted. And many inhabitants were taken prisoner. For another kingdom, this might have ended the war. But not for Amanirenas. She regrouped. Reorganized her forces. And continued fighting. The deeper Rome moved south, the harder the campaign became. The desert heat was brutal. Supply lines stretched dangerously thin. And Kushite warriors knew the terrain far better than the Romans ever could. So the war dragged on. Raids. Counterattacks. Ambushes along the Nile. Neither side could land a final blow. And slowly, Rome began realizing something dangerous. This queen was not going to surrender. Eventually, both sides agreed to negotiate. Kushite ambassadors traveled to the island of Samos, where Emperor Augustus was staying. Think about that for a second. The ruler of Rome sat down to negotiate with representatives of a one-eyed African queen who had invaded his territory and buried his image beneath her feet. And in the end, Augustus agreed to peace. The treaty was extraordinary. Rome dropped its tax demands. Captured territories were returned. The border was recognized. And Kush remained independent. This was almost unheard of in Roman history. Rome rarely negotiated unless it had to. But continuing the war against Kush simply was not worth the cost. The terrain was punishing. The resistance was relentless. And Amanirenas refused to break. So Rome stepped back. And Kush remained free. So who exactly was Amanirenas? The truth is, we still know far less than we should. The written language of Kush, Meroitic script, has only been partially translated. Much of what survives about her comes from Greek and Roman writers. Even her enemies respected her. The historian Strabo described her as fearless and powerful. Kushite temple carvings show Candaces towering over enemies, armed with weapons, standing as symbols of royal strength. Not passive figures. Not secondary rulers. Conquerors. And behind all the victories and battles, there was also loss. Her husband died during the war. She fought Rome as a widow. With one eye. Leading armies through the desert against the greatest empire of the ancient world. That alone makes her extraordinary. Amanirenas won. Not perfectly. Napata was destroyed. Lives were lost. But Kush survived. The taxes ended. The borders held. And Rome never seriously attempted to conquer Kush again. For centuries afterward, the two powers maintained an uneasy peace. Rome had learned something important. Kush was not an easy target. Today, Amanirenas is still largely unknown outside academic circles. But traces of her remain. In ruined temples. In desert carvings. In the buried bronze face of Augustus Caesar. A face that spent nearly 2,000 years beneath the footsteps of an African queen. History nearly forgot her. But we remember. That was the story of Amanirenas. Warrior queen of Kush. Defender of Nubia. The woman who stood against Rome, and survived. If you enjoyed this journey into forgotten history, make sure to subscribe to Echoes of the Forgotten. And tell us in the comments. Who should we uncover next? Because history still has many voices waiting to be heard. I'll see you in the next echo.